A wife, mom, and educator is now an accused pedophile. This 41-year-old woman is accused of having sex with an underage boy who was once a student at the school that she taught at. And on top of that, just wait until we dive into the criminal complaint. She is accused of sending explicit pictures of herself to other teen boys. The law enforcement documents that we have in this case are shocking, including the allegation that this woman was, quote, flirting with her alleged victim since he was just 12 years old. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, before we get back to this story, I want to talk about an important tool that we use here at Law&Crime, truthfinder.com. Truthfinder is the powerful public records search service that we use to do research here on Law&Crime, helps us understand more about the people involved in our stories. You plug in a name, you can get address information, criminal history, and more. And it can really give you some peace of mind. You can use it even if you don't work in true crime like we do, because Truthfinder is one of the largest public records search services in the US. And with a paid subscription, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone in your area, and that can include looking up registered sex offenders who live near you as well. So stay safe, stay informed, search public records with Truthfinder. Go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Well, on the outside, the suspect in this case seems like a typical mom and wife living a pretty typical life in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Her name is Stephanie Jensen. She's 41 years old, and until recently, she worked as a teaching assistant for a second grade class at a private Christian school in Fond du Lac, which is really your quintessential Midwest town, about an hour and 15 minutes north of Milwaukee. But then you read this criminal complaint, and my goodness, what in the world was going on behind the scenes, allegedly in this woman's life? Let's get into it. Deputies say on Tuesday, November 4th, they spoke with a person who is only being identified as victim 1. They were born in September of 2008, according to police, so that would make them 17 years old today. Now, it is unclear how deputies came in contact with victim 1 and what tipped them off that something may be allegedly going on with Jensen. Now, the victim told deputies that Jensen, the 41-year-old mom, had been, quote, flirty with him since he was 12 years old. The teen told deputies that Jensen was a family friend. He told a story where once they were all at this family party and Jensen was allegedly rubbing up on a lot of people at this party, and the victim claims that she rubbed up on his lap, and he described Jensen as, quote, tipsy at this event. So before we get into where Jensen allegedly sexually assaults this victim, let me tell you a little bit more about what we know about her. She was a teaching assistant at Faith Lutheran School in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. She worked in a second grade classroom, and victim 1 says that he was an 8th grader at the time that she started working at the school. And this part, it could be key legally because that potentially shows that she knew exactly how old this alleged victim was. It also appears through social media that Jensen is married with 2 kids. Now, there is that saying, you never know who someone really is. And this criminal complaint allegedly is an example of that. So victim 1 told deputies that he and Jensen messaged on Snapchat. That in some ways can be a red flag right there. In so many of these cases, we have seen where victims and abusers communicate on that platform. Now, Jensen allegedly sent this boy explicit pictures of herself. And not only that, the victim alleges that she, quote, was sending his buddies nude content as well. Victim 1 said word traveled throughout his friend group that she was willing to share. So people he knew would add her to see if she would share with them. Victim 1 said the guys knew that she was having sex with other people, so they would add her because they said, quote, I'm gonna add her and see what I can do to her, end quote. Now the boy said that Jensen would allegedly send pictures of her naked body and she would send videos of herself using sex toys. The boy alleges that Jensen would ask those boys what they preferred. The boy also said that he sent Jensen explicit pictures of himself. Jensen also allegedly messaged on Snapchat with this victim to get him to come over to her house. He said the first time they allegedly had sex was when he was 15 years old. Now, victim 1 stated that he would receive a message from Jensen saying that her husband was gone and she would be telling him to come over. Now, Jensen allegedly told the boy not to wear a condom because she told him that she could not get pregnant anymore. Deputies believe that Jensen and this teen had sex at least 4 different times. The boy said that he would park in a field north of Jensen's home and he would enter her house through a door that would avoid a ring camera that she had set up. Now, not only did Jensen allegedly sexually abuse this boy at her house, in her bedroom, when her husband was gone, deputies allege that Jensen actually met up with this teen boy on October 13th of this year at a Target. She allegedly kissed the boy and left the store. And get this, the boy says that Jensen allegedly followed the boy to a public hunting land parking lot near Target. And the boy says they allegedly had sex that, quote, got interrupted by someone who arrived in the same parking lot that went to walk their dog on the trail. Now, it appears it's not just the word of the teen that law enforcement has when it comes to evidence in this case. Law enforcement extracted information from the victim's cell phone, and deputies say there is a string of messages from October 25th of this year where Jensen allegedly tried to convince the boy to come over to her house. She also allegedly hearted an explicit image that the boy sent her with a reply that we won't be able to say here on air. So now we're at the point of the story where deputies are ready to confront this 2nd grade teaching assistant about what they had gathered and to get her alleged side to the story. So deputies say they have this conversation with Jensen, and at first she denied having sex with the boy. She did admit, though, that the boy sent her nude images. But then deputies asked Jensen how she would respond receiving that image from a minor, and she said, quote, I don't know, I'd have to look back. Now, let's be honest, you would think that someone, especially an educator who receives that image, would either report it or at the very least remember what they said and what they did in response to it. Now, Jensen also allegedly said that she never shared any pictures or videos sent to her with anyone else. She then allegedly admitted sending a selfie to victim 1. So the detective followed up on that, asking her if her breasts were exposed in that selfie, to which she replied allegedly, quote, yeah, I don't know. At this point, detectives determined it was time to bring Jensen in to face charges, but it appears she did not go quietly according to these court records, because when she was told that she was under arrest, deputies say Jensen responded with, quote, I am not under arrest. And she would not stand up off the couch that she was sitting on. Deputies then grabbed her by the arm, they say, to put her in handcuffs. 41-year-old Stephanie Jensen is facing 13 counts, 4 counts of child enticement, 4 counts of exposing genitals, 3 counts of sexual intercourse with a child, 1 count of 2nd-degree sexual assault of a child under 16 years of age, and 1 count of child pornography. Here's Jensen making her first court appearance in Fond du Lac. She appears to really have just looked down for most of that appearance. This is per WFRV TV. Her bond is set at $200,000 cash. And according to WBAY TV, Jensen did ask for her bond conditions to be modified so she could have contact with her own children. The other conditions that are in effect: absolute sobriety, no contact with the victim, no social media usage, and no unsupervised contact with anyone under the age of 18. Jensen is no longer a teaching assistant at Faith Lutheran School in Fond du Lac. The principal released a statement to local media which reads, quote, Faith Lutheran School has determined the employment of Stephanie Jensen upon formal charges being filed in court on Monday. The faculty, staff, and administration at Faith are committed to the safety and care of our students, staff, families, and community. We pray for all who are affected by these events as we continue to put our faith and trust in the Lord, end quote. Joining us now to talk about this case is former sex crimes prosecutor Dan Shore. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. This was just, I know we had just read through before we were recording this, some of the court documents laying out the accusations against Stephanie Jensen, this 41-year-old teacher's aide in a 2nd grade classroom. She has been fired. What stood out to you just kind of reading through that? I mean, obviously in your career, you've written and read a lot of court documents and seen allegations. What stands out to you about what Stephanie Jensen's accused of?
Sure. Well, one thing is that the allegations are not based on a one-time incident. This is an ongoing pattern of alleged misconduct where the boy involved here, who is between 15 and 17 at the time of the actual sexual interaction, says that he had sex on more than one occasion with the teacher when he was underage. There's also evidence and suggestions of sending images back and forth between them. The victim here says that the teacher would send him nude photographs and that he sent such content to her. When she was interviewed by police, she didn't really deny that in a clear way. Now, she has the right to remain silent. She's innocent until proven guilty, but certainly her answers were not as strong as you would think someone would be if they had never engaged in this kind of conduct. You think someone would be very strong and say, no, I never did that. And there's also allegations here that other boys might have also received nude photos from her. We don't know if that's true yet. I'm sure law enforcement is investigating that. But if that's accurate, that's another added part of this that makes it really unusual that so many people would be involved as victims in an ongoing course of conduct like this.
Yeah, and if that allegation was true, it would just come off as just so brazen for someone to do that. She is facing a charge of child pornography, and just reading through the arrest document, the victim says that he had sent, and apparently there's evidence that police have from just extracting information from his phone, that he had sent an explicit picture to her, and then she might have hearted it or liked it. And that is what when police asked her about that, she had said something along the lines of, I don't know, I'd have to go back and look. Would that one photograph being sent to her be considered in possession of child pornography?
Absolutely. It's going to be on her phone if that's true. If she actually liked it, affirmed that she wanted to receive it, which that's part of the allegation, that's absolutely possession of child pornography if it depicts a nude person who's underage. And going back to what you just said about, she said she had to look into whether this really happened. And usually people who did not engage in this type of conduct are very strong that they did not. You know, if you're asked, did you send nude photos or receive nude photos with an underage person? You're going to say absolutely not very quickly if you had not. So again, she's innocent until proven guilty. She has the right to remain silent. She doesn't have to admit to anything, but that's a very damning response from her that she's kind of hedging on whether this happened or not, when most people who didn't engage in that type of conduct would be very clear and very interested in clearly saying that they did not do it.
Yeah, and that was kind of on the child pornography front, because could an argument, and sometimes I just like to think about what a defense attorney might say for someone who's facing as serious a charge as that is, but if they could argue that she didn't ask for this picture and it was sent to her, is just the action of liking that image or hearting that image the same in the eyes of the law as someone who seeks out on the dark web child pornography, like we see in a lot of cases, where if you're receiving it and it's just being sent to you, you never asked for it, that is still something that could be argued that you're guilty of possessing child pornography?
I would think so, and that's certainly going to be the prosecutor's argument, because if you heart an image like that, you're saying that you wanted to receive it, right? If you suddenly received an unwanted spam message that contained child pornography on your phone, you would probably be horrified and you would not heart it. So just possessing it on your phone, if it's unwanted and it's sent to you, is not going to be possession of child pornography in terms of breaking the law, but someone acknowledging that they wanted to receive it or that they welcomed it and hearting an image like that from someone that you're interacting with. I think the context is also important, that there's allegations that they were having in-person sex, oral sex, vaginal sexual intercourse. So that goes also to show the intent of this teacher when she received this image, that it was part of a course of conduct. If this was an isolated incident, maybe she'd have a stronger argument to say, well, I just received this, I didn't want it. But she was having an ongoing sexual relationship with this underage boy, according to the allegation. So that provides more context and support for saying that the child pornography was intentionally received, or at least once it was received, she intentionally kept it and liked it. So it's pretty powerful arguments by the prosecutors and the police here.
It also stood out to me in the 5-page document that we received that they make a point of saying that he was in the 8th grade when she was a teacher in the 2nd grade classroom, and that is something that shows that she knew the age of this boy, that he was underage. And then I'm not on Snapchat myself, but apparently his age was listed on Snapchat as well. I mean, clearly, we don't know this victim, but clearly he is someone who is underage, born in 2008. But when it comes to prosecuting a case like this, why is it important to lay out those things that do seem obvious to us on the outside, that he would be somebody under the age of 18?
Well, I think it goes to show the egregiousness of the conduct when someone's aware that someone's underage and they still engage in both in-person sexual interactions and the receipt of what is child pornography and also sending images to them. However, these crimes, possession of child pornography, engaging in sex with someone who's underage, those are what's called strict liability crimes. So it ultimately doesn't matter whether or not this teacher knew the person was underage. If the person was underage, and we know that this victim was underage, then that alone is a crime to have nude photos of that person, engage in sexual interactions with them. It's not a defense to what's colloquially called statutory rape to say, well, I didn't know they were underage. So I don't think her knowledge is important to just the fact that she committed this crime allegedly, but I think it does go to the egregiousness. It's an aggravating factor, possibly for sentencing, if there's a conviction down the road, to say, well, this person was well aware they were underage, and that can make this an even worse offense.
I think of the part of the story that the victim lays out where she was allegedly sharing images with not just him, but who police call his buddies. And we don't know if that part is true. It doesn't seem that she's facing charges for that as of yet. When it comes to these cases that are laid out, where I think of the narrative that's been put forward that he felt that she was flirty since he was 12 years old. She's sending pictures, he says, to his buddies on Snapchat, very explicit photos that are described in the court document, but she's not facing charges for that. How is it that you can lay those things out in kind of a narrative that's going to be made public, but then at the same time, we don't know if any of that is true?
Right, and that's part of this victim's account. He's referred to as victim one in the narrative you talked about. So I think it's important to give the whole story from this victim, and that's what they did in this document to show probable cause to arrest this defendant. But I don't think you can charge her for sending nude photos to other people just based on this boy saying that happened. I have no doubt that law enforcement is investigating this further and trying to contact those other boys, identify them, get their accounts, maybe image their phones and computers to see if they have evidence of photos being sent to them. And you might see more charges down the road if they find that. But I think it would be premature to charge her without really identifying who these boys were, because you probably want to name a specific victim for those additional charges, and you want to at least see if you could get their cooperation or at least evidence, photos and other social media contact or text message contact to show that this was actually happening.
I'm looking at this victim. He's now 17 years old. He says that they first had sex when he was 15 years old. And then I think of if she did send explicit pictures to other young men on Snapchat, there's probably part of the audience that would look at that and almost brush it off as like boys being boys. Look at these high schoolers getting these pictures of this older woman and not see the problem as serious as it really is. As someone who prosecuted these cases, and I'm sure you've heard people kind of brush that off, and we've talked about it when it's a female teacher and it's the female who is crossing the line, that it kind of gets brushed off a little bit. Why would any of this, knowing the ages of the people involved, and as she was sending to other boys explicit photographs, and again, we don't know if that's true, but if it is true, why is that a problem?
Right, and you're totally right that there was this attitude in society. I think it's less than it was 10, 20 years ago, that it's less of an offense because it's an older female and a young male. I investigate these kinds of cases. I used to prosecute them as a sex crimes prosecutor, and there'll be plenty of times where if I was talking just in general with a male friend or someone about the case I was handling, the response sometimes would be, oh, wow, I wish that happened to me when I was in high school. And it's kind of this wink, wink, nod, nod type of thing. And I think what that overlooks is that this is very traumatic and hurtful to the boy who, they're at an age where they're just learning about sexuality. They're just learning about healthy relationships. And we want people to grow into adults who can have healthy sexual relationships, romantic relationships. And when your introduction to this type of conduct is a teacher highly inappropriately sending you nude photos, someone who's overage, there's a power imbalance when one person's a teacher and one person's a student, also them being older. This can be really destructive to just the formation of someone's own ability to have relationships. And it could be traumatic to boys. I see that a lot. You see men now talking about their experiences like this from many years ago and how it really derailed their ability to have proper relationships, and it was traumatic to them. So I think that now in society, more people recognize that than they did a few years ago, but certainly there's a lot of people who don't take it as seriously as they would if it was an older male teacher, for instance, with a female who's the teenager.
And Stephanie Jensen, she's been fired from this private Christian school that she worked at. She was a teacher's aide in the 2nd grade. The student was in 8th grade back when she started at this school. I look at her profile. She's a mom. It appears she has 2 kids. She's married, lives what appears to be a very normal and I'm sure pleasant life in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And yet you read the allegations, and then there's also from the cell phone data that was extracted, it seems that prosecutors will have a strong case to make an argument that this happened. We'll see how it plays out in court. But I think I always come back in these stories to just the question of like, how does this happen? Like, how does someone who's 41 years old end up being accused of doing this to someone who says that he was 15 when this first happened? And I know that that's kind of the broad question that we'll never potentially have an answer to because we cover these a lot, but just how do you typically make sense of how something like this can happen?
Well, first of all, I would say I've learned in many cases I've investigated that public appearance doesn't necessarily show what's happening in private. And I think that's true for most people, that there's a lot of pressure in society to appear like you have a stable life and a stable family life and a stable career. And behind the scenes, very often that's not the case for many people. And for someone like this, if she committed these crimes and you're wondering why would someone do that, we don't know what her history is. We don't know what she experienced. We know that many people who experience sex abuse when they're younger then go on to commit sex abuse when they're older. We know that people who are in abusive situations may reach out to people in inappropriate ways to try to engage in other types of relationships with other people. So there's so much we don't know, but just the basic appearance of someone being in a marriage with children, living in a neighborhood that seems safe, that doesn't really reveal that person's history and their current life behind closed doors. And that may help explain this. We just don't know yet.
And she's facing more than a dozen charges, 13 in all, very serious charges she's facing. She has some pretty strong bond conditions as well right now, but she is asking for a tweak to the conditions of her bond, which is for her to have access to be able to contact her children. What do you make of that request? And I know it can differ from state to state, but I mean, how, I guess, forgiving in some ways is the court when it comes to that type of request for someone to be able to see their own kids when they're facing some very serious charges against minors?
Yeah, I think that's a type of request from a defendant that is often met. The determination from the court would have to be whether there's any reason to believe that the person is a threat to their own children. There's already part of the bail conditions, the bond conditions are that this defendant cannot have any contact with anyone under 18 in an unsupervised way. If there's no indication in the complaint and in the details of the arrest that she might be a threat to her own children, I think then for the sake of the children, even more importantly than for the sake of this defendant, you want to give some contact with their mother. Maybe they'll try to structure that in a supervised way so someone else is there also, but certainly from the children's perspective, and I think that's the most important part here, to not be able to see their mother at all suddenly, that's going to be even more upsetting to them than already, people are going to learn if they're old enough what their mother's accused of, and that's going to be obviously horrific for them. But to have them not even be able to talk to their mother would be even harsher on them. So that's the kind of change to bond status that some judges will grant and some won't. It really depends on the specific situation.
And we'll see how that plays out and what is certainly some very disturbing allegations out of Wisconsin. Dan Shore, it's always great to have you on Law&Crime, and I know you write. Not only are you a lawyer, but also someone who writes books on these issues. You have a new book that's out right now. What do we need to know about it?
Sure, it's called Open Bar, and it's about sexual misconduct in educational institutions. It's a behind-the-scenes story, fast-moving, about what really happens when people are investigating these cases. So people can search for Open Bar wherever they buy books, or you can follow me on Substack where I write about these types of issues also.
Yeah, retired former sex crimes prosecutor, Dan Shore. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Hope people can check out this book. You do great work. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks. It's good talking with you, and look forward to talking again soon.
Jensen is next due in court on November 17th for a hearing on her motion to modify her bond conditions. She also has a court date set for a preliminary hearing on November 21st. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.